Out there who's been waiting. I think Ami was very uptight to Miami. We're trying to juggle everything and make it all happen. If I was a woman, I'd probably do it a little better, but okay. So we're talking about female prophetic superiority. And I'm going to begin by reminding you that I believe that all of these details in the Gemara are following a common theme. It's a common cadence that weaves its way through all of the incremental pieces of Gemara that we've been learning. And for those who are joining us for the first time, or maybe for those who are here but need a little refresher, the Gemara made a statement on the top of page 14 to the effect in which we say that Haman's being ringed by Achashverosh, meaning being empowered to bring about genocide, was something that galvanized the Jewish people more so than a tremendous amount of prophetic encouragement and exhortation. The Gemara says there were 48 prophets, 7 prophetesses. They did not inspire the Jewish people to return in the way that the actual problem, issue, challenge, or decree of genocide did. Kind of sad, but that's how it is. That's what motivates us, unfortunately. When we get into real trouble, then our true essence is revealed. Maybe it's like something else the Gemara says about the Jewish people being metaphorized as an olive. And it says, Ma'azayis kishakoichenese, moitzi shamnei, that the olive, when you squeeze it or crush it, that's how you get the oil out. It says, Kach Yisrael. So with the Jewish people, that when we get squeezed or crushed, that's when our oil, that's when our juice, that's when our energy is revealed, unfortunately. Of course, the Rebbe made it his life's challenge or his life's work that we should self-challenge. And we shouldn't wait to be challenged from the outside. That was his the mimer that he edited and distributed just before falling ill. It's all about this idea of Ata Tetzava, the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu with the crushed oil, and the idea that exilic circumstances bring forth the most powerful and visceral spiritual responses from the Jewish people. That's what reveals our stamina, our true courage, our potential, our wherewithal is laid bare. And the Rebbe's thesis is that we shouldn't have to wait for negativity. We should be able to find that without the bad stuff. And that's the ultimate job of a Rebbe, to be able to stimulate and inspire a generation that doesn't need Mesirat Nefesh, that doesn't need self-sacrifice in order to keep mitzvot, nonetheless to live self-sacrificially. Despite the fact that they live in plenty and in luxury and having their needs met, though, nonetheless we should still not be comfortable. We should not be tzuguzon, not be relaxed. Anyway, much to say about that. Now, the Gemara returned, then the Gemara goes off and discusses Purim and the notion of Purim and the biblical origin of Purim. And the Gemara comes back and says, okay, 1 second, 48 prophets? We seem to have an indication of many, many more prophets, and the Gemara explained the difference in the prophecy of these 48 and the many others. And the Gemara come back then and said, okay, female prophets Gemara doesn't ask just 7 female prophets. The Gemara says, female prophets? Who are they? And from the fact that the Gemara doesn't ask, weren't there many more prophets? And there are sources for hundreds of thousands of female prophetesses. So if there were so many prophetesses, why does the Gemara not ask the same question? Furthermore, the Gemara doesn't ask who are the 48, and as we learned, Rashi himself struggles to identify 48, only identifying 46, telling us he doesn't know what the other 2 are. But the Gemara here, when it comes to the feminine prophecy, right away says, oh, who are the 7? And strangely skips Rachel and Leah, despite the fact that there are copious sources in Chazal, in the writings of our sages, quoted by Rashi and other Rishonim, that indicate that Rachel and Leah were tremendous prophetesses, endowed with amazing insight and clairvoyance. But the Gemara doesn't even ask that. So the way we explain this Gemara is that the Gemara is like lamenting the fact that even the prophets couldn't motivate us. And the Gemara makes a distinction between the male prophets and the females, the prophetesses. And the reason, the basis of everything that we've kind of developed over the last 2 classes and will continue to try to develop tonight is a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe and a mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, in which they describe the profundity of female prophecy as much more intense because it comes down into our world. And this is based on the teachings on the prophecy of Sarah, of matriarch Sarah, that she was greater than Avram, and that's the explanation, that she was able to bring it down into this world. And from that vantage point, from that platform, we suggested that what the Gemara is really saying is, even the prophetesses, who were not talking in the clouds, who were not in some ivory tower, but were engaged in real life, still couldn't motivate the Jewish people. And that's why the Gemara doesn't ask about only 7. The Gemara says, so who were those 7 prophetesses who merited to bring the Shekhinah down on their own? Not by virtue of their husbands, or virtue of their fathers or brothers, but rather because of who they were. So we talked about Sarah Imenu, and we demonstrated in the verses that it was not due to Avram. In fact, she was a prophetess before she married Avram. And we talked to the idea that Sarah Imenu has a more profound ability when it comes to prophecy. Next, we went to Miriam, and we said it was not because that she was Moses' sister, or Aaron's sister even, but rather because as a small child, on her own accord, she had a prophecy that her father, Amram, the great leader of his generation, could not comprehend and could not appreciate. It was she who saw the actualization, the bringing down of light and redemption for the Jewish people with the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. So we kind of continued the thesis. And that brings us to tonight's Gemara. And the reason that I'm recapitulating what we learned about is because I would like to humbly suggest that everything that we learned about previously, the entire thesis that we developed, will now continue to be advanced. We talk about the mother of prophecy, Sarah Imenu, a matriarch. We talked about prophecy's sister, and that's Miriam. She's introduced as a sister. Miriam Hanavia, Achois Aharon. So we nicknamed it prophecy's sister. And today we're going to talk about prophecy's wife. But it's not what you think it is. She's not a prophetess because her husband is a prophet. In fact, she is far more prominent than her husband. We're not even sure who her husband is. And according to at least one version, her husband was a very, very simple person. Not spiritually articulate and not spiritually sophisticated at all, as we will see. Well, with no further ado, let us actually take a look at the Gemara, page 14, Daf Yud Daled, Amud Aleph, where kind of near where the widest lines on the page come to a close. It's like in the bottom 35% of the page. The Gemara, I'm going to read the whole Gemara to you. It's just like 2 lines of Gemara that we're going to learn today, but I'd like to tell you that these 2 lines of Gemara on the surface seem to make little to no sense. They really do not seem to be answering the question on the surface at all. Let's read through it. Quick read through, and let me tell you, you'll see yourself why it's so difficult to understand. So the Gemara said Devorah. The third is Devorah, with to Sarah, the matriarch, Miriam, the prophetess, who helps lead the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, sings the song of Vaz-Yashir together with Moshe Rabbeinu. And then we hear about Devorah. Now we're going into the days of the judges. How do we know this? Where is Devorah identified as a prophetess? She's identified as a shofetet. She's a judge of the people. She's a tremendous scholar. She adjudicates. But where does it say that she is Devorah Hanaviyah, Devorah the prophetess? It doesn't. Nowhere does it say Devorah Hanaviyah, Devorah the prophetess. So this itself is the question of the Gemara. How can you make a statement like that? Devorah was a prophetess. Where's the scripture? Where's the backing? Where's the proof? So the Gemara says, Dichsiv, because it says, V'Devorah Isha Neviah. Sorry, I spoke too soon. It does say she's a prophetess, I'm sorry. But, okay, I get a little confused there. It says Devorah Isha Neviah, but the pasuk goes on to say, Eshet Lapidot, the wife of Lapidot. And so Devorah is a Neviah. Really, the pasuk should have stopped right there. The Devorah Isha Neviah. Stop. Devorah is a prophetess. But it doesn't stop there. The Gemara goes on to say, Eshet Lapidot. She's the wife of Lapidot. So the Gemara starts asking, My Eshet Lapidot. What does it mean, the wife of Lapidot? What do you mean? We said Devorah is a prophetess. It says, V'Devorah Isha Neviah. That's it. Gemara should shut the case down. How do you know Devorah is a prophetess? Because it says Devorah is a prophetess in the story. Instead, the Gemara now quotes two additional words. There's a longer pasuk. The pasuk doesn't end there. The pasuk says, Devorah was Eshet Lapidot, and the Gemara goes on to speak about what she used to do. The pasuk goes on to speak about. So, but the fact is, we don't quote the rest of that verse. We don't quote the rest of that pasuk. It says over there, Eshet Lapidot. The rest of the pasuk is, He shafta es Yisrael be'etahi. She judged the Jewish people at that time. The Gemara does not choose to quote this verse in entirety. Instead, the Gemara quotes V'Dvorah Isha Neviah, and instead of shutting it down there, the Gemara continues and says, and the rest of the verse is Eshet Lapidot. And then the Gemara stops and does not add the last 6 words of the pasuk, He shofetet et Yisrael be'esahi. So the thing that's most insignificant about this pasuk is whose wife she is. Who cares? She is a prophetess. She is a judge for the Jewish people at that time. Who cares whose wife she is? And the Gemara starts to discuss this. My Eshet Lapidot. What is Eshet Lapidot? What's the question? She's Lapidot's wife. What's the problem? No. Shaisa Oisa Psilis LaMigdash, that she was making wicks for the Beis HaMikdash. Really? Where did you get that from? What was the issue? Why does it say Eshet Lapidot? And what's the answer? What's the question? What's the answer? What does it have to do with the discussion at hand? And then the Gemara gives us another verse, another pasuk. This other pasuk does not mention prophecy at all. V'yoshevet tachat tomer. She sits under the date tree. And there's the rest of the pasuk, which the Gemara doesn't quote. The Gemara says, Bein Harama, or Bein Beitel, between the heights, and between Beitel, in the Har Ephraim, in the mountains of Ephraim, V'yalo ila b'nei Yisrael mishpat, the Jewish people, the children of Israel went there to be judged. The Gemara doesn't quote the rest of the pasuk. The Gemara just says, she's sitting under a tomer. And the Gemara says, Maishna tachat tomer. What does this mean, sitting under a date tree? So we have Reb Shimon ben Avshalom says, she sat under a date tree because of the issues of seclusion. And this way it was very open, there was not leafy foliage, so there will be no issue of her being secluded with another man, which would be inappropriate. Or, Davar Acher, Matamer ze ein lo elo lev echad, af yisrael shabot ha'ador, lo ha'yla elo lev echad. That there's some kind of metaphor and euphemism that we see a date tree, the date tree grows a certain way, and because the date tree grows a certain way, the Jewish people at the time were also in similar fashion, which doesn't even say that Devorah caused this or brought this about, but it's kind of implicit or understood. What does that have to do with prophecy? The whole Gemara is superfluous. The Devorah Isha Neviah. Shut it down, that's all. That's good enough. Who says Devorah was a prophetess? Scripture. And this is really the same question we had earlier with regard to Neviah. It's in Miriam. It says, Vatikach Miriam ha-Neviah, and then the Gemara quotes Achot Aaron. The Gemara goes the whole discussion. Achot Aaron, V'lo Achot Moshe, the sister of Aaron. Hello. You wanted to know where it says. End the story. You have a pasuk. It says Isha Neviah. Case is shut down. What is the purpose of the next 2 lines of the Gemara? Why does the Gemara go on to expound the idea of Eshet Lapidot? And the Gemara says making wicks in the Beis HaMikdash. It seems to be totally irrelevant. Totally not to the point. And then to bring another pasuk with, nice ideas, speaking either about the virtue of Devorah or the virtue of the Jewish people. What does that have to do with the issue at hand here? Those are the obvious questions. I think they're abundantly obvious questions, although the Mefarshim do not really discuss it at great length. The Mefarshim do discuss the details to try to have how to try to understand the meaning of the Gemara, but the basic question is why quote these verses all together? Why bring these teachings all together? I did not find addressed. And my suggestion is going to be that based on the teachings of Chassidus, of the Mittler Rebbe, and of the Tzemach Tzedek quoting the Alter Rebbe, based on the way Chassidus views female prophecy, we will see the same idea now being carried out, the same thesis further promulgated, first with Sarah, subsequently with Miriam, and now with Devorah. So now that you know what we're going to do, let's do it. Devorah d'chsiv. The Gemara begins, it says Devorah because it is written in the book of Judges, chapter 4, verse 4. It says, V'Devorah Isha Neviah. Devorah is a woman prophet. a woman who's a prophet, a prophetess in English. Eshet lapidot. So the Gemara says, what is the business, what is the meaning of Eshet lapidot? Now, at first I want to tell you how the Ben Yehoyada learns the Gemara, and then I'm going to tell you why I have a difficulty understanding what the Ben Yehoyada is saying, and I'm going to follow the approach of the Maharsha, and I think that the Maharsha's approach is the one that will bring us satisfaction, and will follow, the way we're trying to understand this Gemara. So, according to Ben Yehoyada, the question is, the Gemara says, why is she called Eshet Lapidot? After all, she is Eshet Barak. That's what he says. So why is she called Eshet Lapidot? Now, here's the problem with the Ben Yehoyada. Here's why I don't understand him. The source of Devorah being the wife of Barak is found in the 9th chapter of Tana Devei Eliyahu. This is the teachings from the yeshiva of, you guessed it, Eliyahu Hanavi. So Eliyahu Hanavi's yeshiva, they taught many different amazing midrashim and things. This is very early medrash. And over there in the yeshiva of Eliyahu Hanavi, they have a whole exposition on Devorah Isha Neviah Eshet Lapidot Hi Shafta Es Yisrael Ba'itahi. So the Gemara tells us a story that Baila, Tanit Eliyahu says, Baila shel Dvorah am ha'aratzaya. Devorah, very learned, very sophisticated, very spiritual, clairvoyant, prophetic. She was married to a very simple man, a salt of the earth, simple person. Uncultured, uneducated, unlettered, like illiterate. Amr lo yishtai. So his very sophisticated, educated, and spiritually inclined wife said, Boy ve'esel achapsilis, come, I'm going to make you wicks. And I want you to bring these wicks to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Mikdash that's in Shiloh. As Rashi says, Rashi says the Mikdash, Rashi says Mishkan Shiloh, the Mishkan of Shiloh. But we know, the Gemara tells us that Mishkan Ikri Mikdash, Mikdash Ikri Mishkan, that sometimes the terminology is interchangeable. In fact, when the Torah introduces us in Parshas Truma to the idea of a Mishkan, it says V'asuli Mikdash, V'shachanti. So we know that they have Mikdash and Mishkan. Mikdash means hallowed sanctuary. Mishkan means place of God's presence. Mishkan and Mikdash, they're interchangeable. All right. So she said, I want to send you along with wicks to Mishkan Shiloh. And she says, at least this way, if you're going to come to Beis HaMikdash, and you're going to become a supplier of the wicks to the menorah, so you'll be coming there often, and you'll be around appropriate people, good people, and we are all products of our environment. Like the Mishnah says, you should always be around Talmidei Chacham. Roll in the dust of the feet, proverbially speaking. Hang around with good people, stick with good people, you'll be influenced in a positive way. Go with bad people, you'll be influenced in a negative way. As Rashba, the great Spanish Rishon, says, Adam hu medini, a person is provincial. We are influenced by our surroundings and our environment. You cannot say, nothing doesn't influence me, I'm not touched by it, I'm unmoved by it. That's not human. It's human to have interaction. It's human to be a social animal. It's human to have relationships, and we are going to be influenced by the relationships we maintain. It's not possible otherwise. So she said, at least you'll be in good company. Be good company. He made very thick wicks. Now there is another version, the Yeshua Yankiv brings down the version of the Alkut Shemaini, the he hoisa oisa. She was making the wicks, not him. He was the delivery boy. He drove the truck. He just brought the wicks. She made the wicks. At any rate, he made the wicks, she made the wicks. He goes on to say, Shalosha Shemot Yeshlo. This unlettered, simpleton husband of Devorah had 3 names. And what are the 3 names? Baruch, Lapidot, and Michael. That's the origin of Baruch being the husband, of Devorah.
What's the third name?
Michael. So here's what bothers me. Why the Gemara says, my Eshet Lapidot. After all, Baruch is her husband. What do you mean? Baruch is Lapidot. If you would say Lapidot, you say, why do you call him Baruch? If you say Baruch, why do you call him Michael? I mean, he's known by different names. Like, I don't understand. What exactly is the issue over here? What is the question? Furthermore, if you learn this Gemara the way that Ben Yehoyada learns it, what is the point? As they say in Gemara language, l'may nafka mina. What difference does it make? What difference does it make if the scripture chooses to say Eshet Lapidot or Eshet Barak? What does that have to do with the subject at hand? The subject at hand is, was she a prophetess or not a prophetess? Or, simply stated, she was a prophetess? From where do we know this? And the answer is very easy. Scripture. Book of Judges, chapter 4, verse 4. V'dvora isha neviah. There you go, that's all. She's a prophetess. End of story. It says it once, that's good enough. Why bother bringing this business of whose husband she was? Of what relevance is that? Whose wife? So the Maharsha has a very different way of learning the Gemara. The Maharsha says that the only reason that the scripture would identify a woman by telling us who her husband was is because her husband would be more widely known. She wasn't well known. So therefore, if you want to say who she was, it doesn't mean that she wasn't more as virtuous or greater or less virtuous. That's not the point about virtuous. It's not about chauvinism or equality or all other mumbo-jumbo political correctness that has nothing to do with the truth. The question simply is, why would the Torah do this? And the answer is, because you want to give a station identification. Who is this person? So if this was the spouse of a very, very famous person, then now I know who this person is. And it doesn't mean she doesn't have virtues on her own. It doesn't mean she wasn't extraordinary. On the contrary, if she was the spouse of that person, you can only imagine what a great person she was. A case in point is the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, the Rebbe's Rebbetzin. We revere her. We hold her on the highest pedestal. She is a lodestar for all of us. But if somebody would say, who is the Rebbetzin? Is the Rebbe's wife. Wow, the Rebbe's wife? Yeah, the Rebbe's wife. The person that the Rebbe was confided in, the Rebbe's confidant, the person that the Rebbe built a life together with, the person who gave everything away so the Rebbe should be able to do what he could do and was his rock and his strength. But people in the world, certainly not years ago, maybe a little bit more now, but never heard of Rebbe Chaim Mushka. Who is Rebbe Chaim Mushka? They didn't know. He said Lubavitch Rebbe. He was very famous. He says, this is Lubavitch Rebbe's Rebbetzin, Lubavitch Rebbe's wife. Oh, wow. But she was very humble. So what does she used to do? She would make a phone call before the days when you could point, click, and shop, or use her iPhone, right? She would maybe call a store. She would say, this is Mrs. Schneerson from President Street. It was like crazy humility, but that's how it was. Off the charts humility. She didn't want to say who she was. She just used her name or last name, identified by a street. So if somebody wants to say, do you know who that is? Now who is that? That's the Rebbetzin. That's the Rebbe's wife. Wow, that's the Rebbe's Rebbetzin. That's the Rebbe's wife. So in the same way, if it says Devora, and it says, you know what Devora is? Devora is Eshet Lapidot. That would make perfect sense. Except, says the Maharsha, in fact, that makes no sense at all here. Tell me why it makes no sense. Because Lapidot is unknown. And Devora is known. So if anything, people would say, who's that guy? Oh, that's Lapidot. He is Baal Devora. He is, oh, wow, the husband of Devora. That would make sense. Was once a woman who knew my wife very well, sent her children to nursery school, and she bumped into me. Someone says, which rabbi? I know, you're Feigi's husband. I said, right. For her, I was Feigi's husband. Fine. So my wife was so happy. She says, usually it's the other way around. Finally, you're my husband, not I'm your wife. But the point is not about equality here. It's not a game we're playing as identified by the husband, identified by the wife. That's not the point. Your point is you're using something which is known to identify an unknown. An example, another very easy to understand case in point. We here live in the municipality which is called Vaughan. The city of Vaughan is called the city above Toronto. It's a very humble name for our city. Now I ask you a simple question. Why does Vaughan have to identify itself as the city above Toronto? Beneath Toronto, next to Toronto, fine, we're above Toronto. Toronto doesn't care. Say whatever you want about yourself. We feel really good. We're the city above Toronto. Why do we have to say the city above Toronto? Toronto never says, Toronto city beneath Vaughan. or above Vaughan, or next to Vaughan. Tell me why. Because nobody ever heard of Vaughan. That's why. But everybody heard of Toronto. That's an international city. So when people ask me where I'm from, I don't say I'm from Vaughan. From where? Vaughan, Ontario. People think this neighborhood is called Flamingo. Of course it isn't. But oh, you're from Flamingo. Like, where is that? It's a street in Thornhill, which is a neighborhood in the city of Vaughan. So what do we write in the ketubah? In the ketubah, if the wedding is in here in Thornhill, or in the city of Vaughan, you have to write an identifiable location that people know about. So what do? So we used to write Thornhill hasmucha leToronto. Thornhill, which is next to Toronto. Not because there are 16 Thornhills and you have to know which Thornhill we're talking about, because nobody ever heard of Thornhill, but everybody heard of Toronto. So what I write oftentimes now, sometimes it's not exactly in Thornhill, so I write in a Kesuba, Mata Vaughan hasmucha leToronto. City of Vaughan, which is close to Toronto. I don't write above Toronto because that's just like, that's Vaughan's choosing to look at itself that way because it's north. But Toronto is a known commodity. So therefore, if you're writing a name that's known and this is adjacent to or attached to, so then you know what it is. Very simple. So that's the reason we would use a location, because we want to give an identification. Where was this taking place? If it's not a known municipality or not a known neighborhood or not a known city, you'll say it's close to. In the same way, we don't know who Devorah is. We know who Lapidot is. So we say Devorah is Eshet Lapidot. Except, says the Marsha, that makes absolutely zero sense. Because everybody knows who Devorah is, and nobody knows who Lapidot is. So why would the Torah say, why would the scripture say Eshet Lapidot? So there's an issue here. There's really an issue here. The pasuk does not seem to make any sense. And the pasuk says it right after Devorah Isha Neviah, Eshet Lapidot. Devorah is a prophetess, the wife of Lapidot. So the Gemara then is understanding that Eshet Lapidot, my Eshet Lapidot, it can't be that she's being identified as Lapidot's wife because Lapidot's unknown. If anything, you would identify Lapidot as Baal Devorah. So the Gemara answers, Shahayata osa ptilot lamigdash, because she was making wicks for the Beis HaMikdash. And here, my dear friends, is clearly the point. The way the Marsha learns this, that she was making the wicks for the Migdash, which is Mishkan Shila, the way the Marsha explains it is that when we say Eshet Chayil, Eshet Chayil can be translated as the wife of Chayil. But that's ridiculous. Who's Chayil? What is Chayil? Chayal in Hebrew could be a soldier, or Chayal could mean valor. So what is the meaning of Eshet Chayil? A woman of valor. So why she's called the wife of valor? Because Eshet Chayil doesn't mean the wife of, it means the one who possesses. The simplest example that I could give you is bar or bat mitzvah. Bar is Aramaic for ben. Ben mitzvah. Bar mitzvah means son of mitzvah. What do you mean son of a mitzvah? He's the son of his parents. What do you mean son of a mitzvah? It means he's now a master of mitzvahs. This is a person who has the ability to fully perform mitzvahs. He now has the potential to master mitzvahs, to make mitzvot his. As a child, he doesn't have that potential. Do you know why? Because before he's 13, he usually didn't hit puberty. And guess what comes along with puberty? A big, raging, evil inclination. A big Yetzer Hara. That's when they begin the teen years. And it's not a Jewish thing that the teen years you have to survive when the kids to become teenagers. So that's when kids become rambunctious and troublesome and all kinds of lust-ridden realities. All this begins exactly at the time of Bar Mitzvah. Why? Because holiness and righteousness can only be yours when you have the choice to do otherwise. And the child is relatively innocent. Yeah, there are good kids, but he's not really a righteous kid. Righteous kids aren't a thing. It was, if my memory doesn't fail me, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rosh Hashiva of Chicago, came to the Rebbe when the Rebbe was sitting Shiva after the Rebbetzin in 1988, and he asked a bracha for a grandchild who was tragically battling cancer. And he said to the Rebbe, "It is a ingel a tzaddik. He's a child, is a tzaddik." And the Rebbe said something to the effect of, "I don't mean to question that, but a child can't be a tzaddik," the Rebbe said. Why? Because you need to have a Yetzer Hara to be a tzaddik. You have to have vanquish a Yetzer Hara to be a tzaddik. A yingel a tzaddik. He could say he's a beautiful yingel, a zisi yingel, a wonderful child, a fantastic child, an innocent child. But you really become righteous when you're capable of the opposite of righteousness. That's when righteousness expresses itself fully. So when are you a bar mitzvah? When are you a bat mitzvah? When are you a son of mitzvah, a daughter of mitzvah? Which doesn't mean a son, a daughter. Literally, it means a master of mitzvah. You are like the result. You're resultant of a mitzvah. When are you resultant of a mitzvah? Or when does mitzvahs become your emo, your moxie? It becomes your definition when you're capable of the opposite. So here too, we would have to understand the Gemara is saying, Eshet Lapidot. Eshet Lapidot does not mean she is the wife of Lapidot, even though according to the Talmud that was actually her husband's name. That's irrelevant. It's not relevant if his name was Lapidot, or Barak, or Michael, or he was nameless. It's pointless, because when the Gemara here is identifying Devorah, it's talking about a known commodity. And to tell us that she is Eshet Lapidot has nothing to do with this identification. And the Gemara says, the Pasuk identifies Isha Neviya Eshet Lapidot. So therefore, what does it mean, Eshet Lapidot? The Gemara says, my Eshet Lapidot. Eshet Lapidot doesn't mean she's the wife of Lapidot. Eshet Lapidot means that she was the master of something called Lapidot. Eshet, as if like an Eshet Chayil. So my Eshet Lapidot. And the Gemara says, a lapid, by the way, is a torch. It says Shahaita Osa Ptilot Mikdash, because she was making these torches, she was making these wicks for the Mikdash. Now it's very interesting. The Gemara doesn't quote the teaching of the Talmud that she's tried to make her husband meritorious, even though he was a very simple and unlettered and artless fellow, and said, "You know what? Go to the Beis HaMikdash. I'll give you a job to do, and this way you'll become meritorious by being in the company of meritorious people and make your business Beis HaMikdash business, so you'll be there all the time." The Gemara doesn't talk about that. The Gemara, in fact, says, Shehi, Shahaita, she was making these Ptilot and Mikdash. Doesn't mention anything about her husband. Now, how does Lapidot, which means torches, how does that get to wicks? So that's a really good question. So there are a number of ways of explaining this. One method of explaining it is that the difference between the word Lapidot and Ptilot, they have all of the same letters with one glaring exception. Lapidot has a dalid, and Ptilot has a tuf. Dalid is the gematria of 4. Tuf is the gematria of 400. But there's something called a gematria ktana, a minor gematria. And that is to say, when I come to the letter Tuf, instead of reading it as 400, I read it as 4. It's 4 times 10. It's 40. 4 times 100 is 400. But the point is, it's still 4. So because it's 4, Dalet is 4, and Tuf is 4. And therefore, from that perspective, if you use the Gematria Ktana, then you have the same Gematria between Lapidot and between the word Petilot. This is how the Eitz Yosef explains it. However, the question, of course, would remain, then why say Eshet Lapidot? Why don't you just say Eshet Petilot? Why do you need to have a gematria, which requires all this creative tinkering, where you're turning into a gematria ktana, where a tuf becomes a dalid, 400 is squared off to 4. Why don't you just say she was Eshet Chayil, Eshet Petilot? So the Eitz Yosef says, because it doesn't want to say just Petilot, because Petilot will just tell you wicks. There's nothing special about that. She made special wicks. She made wicks which created a lapid. She made very thick wicks which created torch-like light instead of wicks that only created or allowed for the kindling of the menorah. She allowed for the kindling of a very bright light. And this was a very, very special thing that she did. She had to kind of use a lot of talent to make these thicker wicks that would still work in a smaller menorah, which would make a very bright light, but nonetheless allow the menorah to burn as it was supposed to. So because there was this creative process that she engaged in, so therefore they were avot kalapidim, they were thick like torches, and there was light that was shed like a torch. I should tell you that the Mitzudas David on the pasuk says that Eshet Lapidot means kilapid esh, like a torch of fire. So in other words, what are we saying then? We're saying here then that Devora Isha Neviah, how did she merit prophecy? She merited prophecy. What did she do to merit prophecy? And the answer is Eshet Lapidot, because she worked on these wicks. This was her ticket. Because she created these wicks, that's why she was able to merit the prophecy. And this is going to have to be meaningful. And of course I asked you the question, why? Why is that meaningful? So what? So what if she made wicks? Who cares how she merited the prophecy? So I think I have an explanation for this. But first I just want to point out that there is another opinion altogether about this. And there was Lamigdash does not mean for the menorah, because the Gemara doesn't say Lemenorah Samigdash. The Gemara simply says Oseptilot Lamigdash. She would made wicks for the Migdash. So there is another opinion that the wicks here are not referring to the wicks of the menorah, but rather that Devorah was creating torches in the courtyard or area around the Beis HaMikdash so that Torah could be studied there at night. She made the area of the Beis HaMikdash a popular place for sages to come because she had made sure it was always lit up. And we have this idea that Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, the Torah comes from Zion, and Zion is a euphemism for the marked spot or the place of the Mikdash. Of course, Zion in today's day and age, and ever since the time of King David, has meant the city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. But it is possible that Zion should earlier have meant the previous iterations of the Beis HaMikdash. And Shiloh was the place where we had a Mishkan for 360 years, a very long time. So during that period, that would be referred to as Zion. And we know that the Sanhedrin had to be located in the area of the Mishkan or the Mikdash. So therefore it makes sense that Devorah, because she lit up the areas around the Mikdash at night so that people would come there, so that Torah would be studied, that's why she merited to have prophecy. Now, a point of interest is that there's a very interesting Rashi, I think it's a Masechet Sukkah. I didn't manage to find it before the class, but it basically says something to the effect of that how is it possible that the menorah would always burn through the night? So one opinion is it just burned through the longest nights. And the short nights, it would burn for much longer. Day would break and the menorah would keep burning. But there is an opinion that the menorah would burn actually through the night, and that there were different size wicks every single day. So there was a very thin wick in the winter, so it would burn through the long night, and a very, very thick wick in the summer, so that the menorah would extinguish itself or burn out by the time day was breaking. And this was a tremendous wisdom, a tremendous talent and gift and creativity, in which there were such professionals. They knew exactly how thick the wick needed to be, because the container with the oil, the lamp, didn't change. It was made of metals, made of gold. It was always the same size. There was always the same amount of oil. If there's always the same amount of oil, how did it always burn through the night? So one opinion is it burned through the night because there was enough oil for it to burn through the longest winter night. In the summer, it burned for longer. But we have this other idea in the Rishonim that no, it actually burned through the night, each night. And maybe that's the difference. That same idea would be applied here, whether Devorah made a thicker wick, which would have to be a very, very creatively done wick, could still be thicker, still shed more light, but at the same time not get in the way of it burning through the night. And I don't understand that it's possible, frankly, but that seems to be what we're saying. Or the other opinion that the wicks were changing continuously, and that there was a copious amount of wicks. In fact, 365 different shades or sizes maybe. But Devorah created light. She created lapidim. She created not just wicks, but created special wicks so that in the area around the Mishkan would be lit up at night. And because it would be lit up, so light attracts And therefore people would come there, and the Torah would be studied at night. We have this idea that Torah in general has to be studied at night. Nights are given for the study of Torah, like it says in the laws of Talmud Torah, and the person is not supposed to waste their nights or whittle their nights away watching television or playing games or do whatever it is. At night is a time to learn Torah. During the day, people say they're busy, they're working. Great. Now it's at night. Why aren't you learning Torah? That's what you're supposed to be doing. Le'ivra leila ela lemigras, says the Gemara. Night was created so that we should be able to study Torah. So you're supposed to study Torah. Why wouldn't you? You need light. You need light. So here you have light. Devorah created a light situation. So of course, so what is the point? What does this have to do with prophecy? So it's very interesting. The Rebbe, in the Sichos of the last winter, before he fell ill, in the month of Shvat, he spoke about the Rebbetzins. Not about the Rebbetzins, because the previous Rebbetzins, the Yartzeit, is also in Shvat. He spoke a lot about the Rebbetzins. And there's an entire edited Sicha, which is dedicated in the Sefer HaSichos Tafshin Beis to Mailas Nashei U'Bnei Yisrael. It's really a conjunctive Sicha, put together from the talks that the Rebbe delivered on the 6th day of Shvat, Shabbos Parshas Bay, Shabbos Par Yud Shvat, and Shabbos Parshas B'Shalach, which was the 13th of Shvat, and the Koteret, in the beginning of the Sicha, is Al Dvar Mailas Nasheu B'nei Yisrael Tichyana B'Dereinu Zeh. The Rebbe said that he was going to speak about the virtue of the woman of our generation. That's what the whole Sicha is about. So in this Sicha, the Rebbe actually starts to go through the women that show up in the Gemara here, in the order they show up. And the Rebbe talks about Miriam. And then after talking about Miriam, the Rebbe goes on to start speaking about Devorah, Isha Neviah, the wife of Lapidot. And the Rebbe quotes the Gemara. And he says she was making lamps or wicks for the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe said, Dugmasai, that the metaphor for this would be B'migdash shebebeito shel kol echad v'echad miYisrael, in the sanctuary of sorts that we are supposed to be creating in our own private homes. Pu'ulatan shel neshei u'bnot Yisrael, the effect of women and girls, Jewish women and mothers and daughters, or women and girls, is Bahadlakat ner Shabbat. The candles, Shabbat candles, Yom Tov candles, which the purpose is lahoyir es habayis kuloi, to illuminate the whole house. And by illuminating the house, the seviva kula, the environment around the house, and ultimately the whole world. And the Rebbe says that this is bedugmas hapsilas lemigdash. This is similar to the wicks that Devorah made for the Beis HaMikdash, shehiru et hamigdash v'ha'olam kula, which illuminated the Mikdash and the whole world. Mimenu ora yotzel olam, from it light comes through to the world. So the Rebbe seems to be indicating that this does have to do with the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. So I want to share with you a different talk of the Rebbe, in which he speaks about the fact that Maimonides, when he draws or depicts the menorah that's described in Parshas Truma, he makes a point of drawing the menorah with these cups that seem to be upside down. And the question is, why did he depict the cups? They're depicted as rough triangles, and Rashi explains that these are like very ornate goblets, which are narrow on the bottom and get wider on the top. And the Rambam simply drew them in a rough triangle, but he draws them down. And the fact that he drew them down, it was not any easier to draw them facing down than to draw them facing up. So there were reasons to say that the Rambam drew this pointedly and specifically, and that creates a problem, because when it comes to ideas of mitzvahs, we always have this notion of things being right side up rather than upside down. In fact, the krushim, the boards of the Mishkan, could not be laying one on top of the other, because they had to be derech gidulam, they had to be the way that they grow. So it had to be upright lumber. And we know when we take a lulav and esrog, it has to be upright. So if there's an emphasis on doing something upright for a mitzvah, because mitzvahs are upright, why would the cups be upside down? So the Rebbe said that perhaps this has everything to do with the function of the Beis HaMikdash, broadly speaking, and specifically the function of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash. So broadly speaking, we know that the windows in the Beis HaMikdash were constructed in a manner that would not allow the maximum amount of light in, but in fact, the other way around. Very narrow windows at the point of entry going wide. Narrow windows going wide. Kotzer mibifnim umarchiv v'holech litzad chutz. That these windows were, as the book of Kings calls them, shkufim atumim. And shkufim atumim mean, as Rashi explains in Menachos, that they were narrow and widened towards the outside. And the Gemara goes on to say, the Gemara in Menachos, and the Rashi explains the Gemara, K'dei shetehei ora yotze meheichal shetor la'olam. Light should go out of the sanctuary, proverbially speaking, to illuminate the world. In other words, the windows in the Beis HaMikdash were not crafted to allow light in, but rather they served the purpose of allowing light out, if not literally, figuratively. So, which light? What's the light of the Mikdash? The only light in the Mikdash was the menorah. And therefore, the Rebbe says, based on what the Rabbeinu Bechaya says and the Rekanti, that the idea of the menorah was for it to be a source of illumination. And they say that the cups, the ornamental cups that were found on the central shaft of the menorah and on the branches of the menorah represented the idea of spilling light. So if you spill light, the cups have to be facing down because the light's coming out. In other words, it's all about bringing it down. The whole menorah and its lights are bringing the light down. Because light really spreads all over. But here we're trying to force the light down to the lowest common denominator. It's going, cups are facing down. Not just out, but down. We've already talked about the idea of light going out. The Rebbe suggested that the upside down cups mean not just out, but actually a downflow of light. And in that case, it makes perfect sense that the Rambam would have understood that the cups of the menorah, in order for them to serve their proverbial purpose, in order for them to be a paradigm, in order for them to metaphorically depict the purpose of the menorah, they would have to be facing down. Of course, the Rebbe says the walls of the Mishkan are the other way around. They were about creating a private area, about limiting, creating a scrimmage of holiness. The holiness is here and not beyond. Special halachot govern the way we comport ourselves within the confines, within the walls of the Mishkan. But the windows represent the light spilling outwards. So this is what I'm thinking. What was the thesis that we developed to understand this Gemara? That the virtue of female prophecy is such that it's brought down. And again, for people who are just joining us in this class, I urge them to go back to the previous classes, watch the first class, watch part 1, watch part 2, because this is part 3. This is a trilogy, and it will go beyond trilogy. We'll have the same idea articulated again and again in the Gemara. The Gemara's point here is, who are those 7, meaning who are the 7 prophetesses whose prophecy was not just prophecy, but whose prophecy was designed to reach the lowest common denominator? Who were these women whose unique prophecy towered above the prophecy of the male counterparts, because the male counterparts had prophecies which could be termed in a spiritual ivory tower, which remained in the clouds? But it was the woman's prophecy, certain woman, who had the privilege and ability and gift of bringing the prophecy down. So Devorah Isha Neviah isn't good enough. Yeah, Devorah Isha Neviah, she's a prophetess. So what? Then the Gemara could have included that instead of saying 48 prophets, could have said 50 prophets. Of what difference does it make what gender she is? L'may nafka to make a division between women prophets and male prophets. They're human beings through whom God speaks. It's irrelevant. Unless we take the beer, the explanation of Chassidus, which tells us that when the prophecy comes to a woman, and a woman is not just a difference in a bodily sense. A woman is not just different in personality. A woman is different spiritually. In the language of Kabbalah, a man has a neshama of ma, of memhei, and a woman has a neshama of ban. It's a different kind of neshama. It's chachma and bina. It's a different kind of neshama. It has a different ability. That's why men have certain mitzvahs and women have certain mitzvahs. The notion of trying to create equality is creating combustion. It's destroying the way the things that Hashem made. Hashem put Havdalah, Hashem put certain divisions in. These are God-made divisions. These are God-made, unique mandates and missions. And we try to erase those distinctions. We try to confuse those distinctions. We only hurt ourselves because we're going against our grain. And when you go against your grain, you get scratched. It doesn't work. The Gemara, therefore, is making the point of saying that these 7 prophetesses, despite the fact that they were able to bring the prophecy down to the lowest common denominator, despite that she is called Eshet Lapidot, not the wife of Lapidot, she is the master of Lapidot, the master of the thickest of wicks, the greatest of illumination. That she made the thicker wicks for the Mikdash. It was through Devorah's efforts that the Beis HaMikdash, that the menorah was able to illuminate the lowest common denominator. That it was through her prophecy that the light of Torah, that the light of Yiddishkeit, that the light of godliness could come down into the way that it would influence everybody. As they say, not boots on the ground, but inspiration and light on the ground. And despite this, Devorah still didn't manage to engender that wave of tshuva in the way that the ringing of Haman did. That's the point. And if I'm right, and I don't know that I am, but I think I am actually, if this is the Pshat in the Gemara, if we learn the Gemara through the prism of the teachings, the illuminating teachings of Chassidus, that this is about female prophecy, then everything makes perfect sense here. Devorah Isha Neviah, in order to understand the kind of prophecy that was Devorah's, the Gemara continues and says, Eishes Lapidot, and like the Maharsha says, it makes no sense to identify Devorah by the wife of an unknown man. It would make sense the other way around. So therefore, just as in the previous Gemara, Achot Aaron indicated that she was a prophet before Moshe and Aaron were prophets. She was a prophet when she was only the sister of Aaron. Aaron becomes a prophet later. She was a prophet right away. She was the greater, the greater prophetess, had that virtue of prophecy. So too, the concept of Eshet Lapidot is the reason. How did she get Nevuah? Because of that illumination. What is the illumination of the menorah? She increased the light of the menorah. Or increased the light of the Torah. You could, if you say use the other interpretation of the Eitz Yosef, that she created these lamps outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Once again, she was bringing the light of Torah, the light of Mishkan, the light of Mikdash, in the environs outside. Illuminating the night, bringing it down so Torah would be where it belongs, next to the Mishkan and Mikdash in Shiloh. Same idea. That's why she merited prophecy. So then the prophecy that she merited must have been the kind of prophecy that would be absorbed and understood by the lowest common denominator. And yet, they all beat a path to her doorstep. They all came to her, and yet, she couldn't inspire them the way Haman did. The Gemara goes on then, and if this is the Pshat in the Gemara, now we understand the next piece of Gemara. The Gemara says, Hi Yoshevet Tachas Tomer. So the Gemara says, Ma'ishno Tachas Tomer. What's the point? And here the Maharsha says the same thing. You want to tell us where she's sitting? Okay. So they say, wait, where? She's sitting under the date tree. Which date tree? What is there, one date tree in Israel? What's the point? Devorah sat under a date tree. If there was a date tree, and we identified Devorah sat under the date tree, I said, oh, I know the date tree. Now I know it. Now we know where she sat. Instead it says she sat under the date tree. What date tree? Who cares what tree she sat under? Of what relevance is it? Do you want to say she sat under a tree? Sat under a tree. Why would the scripture find it important to tell us that she sat under a tree? It doesn't give us the location of where she was doing her good deeds, from where she was able to serve as a judge, adjudicating for the people, inspiring the people, teaching them Torah. It's irrelevant. Who cares? What is gained by this? So the Gemara first brings down one drasha and says that this is because that teaches us Amar Reb Shimon bar Avshalom, Shum Yichud. The Torah prohibits the seclusion of a man and woman who are not related. So if you're not allowed to be alone with the opposite gender, because that breeds chas v'shalom a closeness which is unhealthy and un-Torah and bad. So you don't do it. And the Rebbe had yechidus, all kinds of people come in. The Rebbe had a huge window open to Eastern Parkway, a busy thoroughfare, one of the most busiest thoroughfares in Brooklyn, and the windows were wide open. People could see. If a woman was there, windows were open. Window shade was open and people could look right in. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if there's 80 years between a man and a woman. It doesn't matter if it's the biggest tzaddik in a generation. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant. Halacha is halacha. Halacha doesn't change. And Devorah was extremely modest. So she sat under a date tree. So what is that? What does a date tree have to do with it? So Rashi says, Mishum Yichud. Shehu Gavoa. The date tree is very high. Ve'ein lo tseil. And it does not have any shade. And therefore, ein adam yachil hisyached sham ima k'may babayis. It would never be a situation where Devorah would be alone. Aloneness was impossible. Why? Because there were no confines. If there would be another tree, so sometimes the other trees can have thick foliage, and the foliage leans over, so it could create what seems to be a privacy, what seems to be a secluded area. But the date tree is one tree that will never be able to create a secluded environment. And interestingly, the Mefarshim point out that even though there will be no locked door, in order for it to be real yichud, there has to be a locked door. So it says that Devorah was a shofetet, as a judge. And as a judge, sometimes the judge needs to be alone with a plaintiff or a defendant. And if a judge is alone, people would be afraid to come to intrude on the justice. So since the justice is sitting alone with a particular individual, a plaintiff or a defendant, because of this, so it would be as if it was proverbially locked. Now, some of the Mefarshim also mention this is not a halachic thing. Halachically, there are all kinds of reasons why it wouldn't be yichud. Baila be'ir, husbands in the city, there was no locked door. It's not the point. Devorah went the extra mile. She went that nobody should ever be able to say there was any kind of seclusion. She went to an extreme. So she showed us this tremendous modesty. And the Rebbe points out, actually in that same sikha, he says, Yosheves tachas, this tree, ein adam yachal is yachadim, according Rashi, and he says this is mailas hatznius. This is the virtue of modesty, which this is, like David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Psalm 45, Kol kavuda bas melech penima, that the real glory and honor of the daughter of the queen is not when she's out there, but rather her privacy and her modesty. Which this is something that's emphasized also in the Shira of Devorah, that it says, she says, Tevorach Minoshim be'ohel tevorach, that she wore the noshim, where the women would be ohel. This is Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And this is the foundation of the Jewish people. So this emphasizes the tremendous modesty of Devorah. Okay, but I don't think the Gemara is gunning for this point. I think the Gemara is gunning for the next point. The Gemara introduces that teaching, but says, okay, but there's another teaching. And the other teaching is, Davar acher, ma tamar zeh ein lo elo leiv echad, just like this tamar only has one central shaft of the tree. Af Yisrael shaboto dar, the Jewish people, the children of Israel of that generation, la hoyu lehem elo leiv echad la avihen shabashamayim. They only had one heart towards their Father in heaven, towards Hashem. And this is a very important point. Why? So leiv echad, Rashi interprets as saraf yeshlo kemin ilon. It has a central shaft through which the hydration of the tree or the sap goes. Aval ein lo ba'anofav. The sap does not go into its branches. The date tree is unique in that it has a single shaft, and that's where its hydration comes from. Elo begizo al pnei kol gavo. It's go right through the central, right through the trunk. Goes through the trunk. That's it. This is what they call also the hearts of palm. So it's actually called a heart, and we know that the lulav is spoken of in the writings of the Rishonim as lo leiv. And very interestingly, there's a Gemara in Brachas on page 57 that talks about various things a person might see in a dream and what the metaphor might be for. And the Gemara says, what if a person sees a lulav? The Gemara says, see a lulav? That means you have no yetzer hara. That means you only have one heart to Hashem. Because it says, v'yahavta Hashem l'kecha b'chol levavcha. B'chol levavcha means b'shnei levavcha, two hearts. Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. But if a person has a dream where he sees a lulav, that means that he's vanquished his Yetzer Hara. The lulav, of course, is also a symbol of victory, like a sword. You vanquished the Yetzer Hara, like it says about David HaMelech, Haragoi B'tainas, he slayed his Yetzer Hara, slayed his demons or his dragons. And therefore he only has one heart for Hashem. So in other words, this Tomer is indicative of Devorah's incredible influence on the Jewish people. Because of her leadership, she was able to bring about a situation where the Jewish people not only did the right thing, but in fact, were transformed. This is like it says in Chassidus, there's iskafia, there's the idea of crushing the lusts, desires, and cravings that a person might encounter. The idea of restraint, and then we go further, we say it's not just about itkafia, it's not just about the crushing, subduing, or restraining, but it's actually about ithapcha. It's about transformation, where you harness and redirect the negative forces so that they themselves become a catalyst to something positive. And the real goal is not simply restraint, but transformation. It doesn't say this about any other leader, that they affected the Jewish people to the point that they were transformed, that they had one lave, one heart. So what are we talking about Devorah? How is she able to influence people through her prophecy? Judgment is judgment. Fine, she gave judgment. But she had to be inspiring the people. How impactful was her inspiration? How efficacious was her preaching or her prophecy? And the answer is, to the point that it was in the image, in the metaphor, in the parable of the date tree, which only has a single shaft. It doesn't branch off in different directions. In other words, she affected the people. She elevated them to the point that she actually transformed them to have only one heart, meaning one desire, one yearning towards Hashem. She turned them into tzaddikim. So what does that tell you again? It tells you about how Dvorah used the prophecy to create transformation. She redirected. She created the sublimation of the Jewish people to the point that they had one heart. That's amazing. That's the idea. That's exactly what we talked about. It didn't remain in the heavens. It came down to earth. And yet we say that this was very amazing and very powerful and very great, but still not as great as Achashverosh taking the ring off and empowering Haman. So this then would be, if I'm right about all this, and again, I might not be, I got to tell you, I think I am. I think this is the kivun. I think this is the right direction. If we learn this based on the teachings of Chassidus, we illuminate this Gemara through the teachings of Chassidus, that the emphasis here is on the prophecy of an Isha. Here we have now 3 in a row. 3 things in a row. You know, Reb Chaim Brisky used to say, how do you know something's true? He said, if you have many, many questions, and all the questions become answered from a single thesis, then that proves that there's a truth to it. Here we have done now, for the 3rd class in a row, we've asked similar kinds of questions, and the same answer filters through. The psukim that we're bringing here all emphasize the notion of bringing it down, the virtue of female superiority, and with this we include part 3. So we talked about mother of prophecy, Sareh Menu. We talked about prophecy's sister, or a euphemism for Miriam, and today we talked about prophecy's spouse, and this is the idea of Devorah and her prophecies that came down to the lowest common denominator, and yet the Gemara laments, ultimately it was the decree of Haman that brought about a greater wave of tshuva, not only of the 48 prophets, but even of the down-to-earth prophecies of these extraordinary women of the ages. Even so, the tragic reality of the pre-Purim story was even greater. And then we'll go further into the birth of prophecy. We'll talk about Chana, to be continued.
Thank you.
Now, this is the last class from Masechet Megillah.